It's great to have you here. This
Thank
is
you
an
very much.
incredible film.
Thank you very much.
First of all, you actually finished the film last year.
You're right.
What were you responding to when you wrote that script?
I mean, it's unfortunate that at that time this script was very relevant. We had a few Canadians that had actually gone overseas and had joined ISIS, and so there was a lot of talk internally within Canada as to what would drive someone to actually throw away their entire life, everything they know, and go overseas and fight for what we consider to be a death cult. And so it was written at a time that was very relevant to the Canadian landscape. I had known personally of people who had actually gone over at that time specifically, and it's sad to say that the film actually is still very relevant. A year later, the topic now is becoming even more relevant, and it's for me, it's about really trying to touch the core issues of what I see to be a small but growing problem.
And you said it in Toronto.
Right.
Why did you want to tell that specific story?
I think the story of the Canadian Muslim is a very unique one, but it does have a lot of parallels with many Muslims living in North America, simply because there are a lot of interesting issues that are at play. You have issues of isolation, issues of alienation, the rise of Islamophobia is really playing into this culture of fear that's been created, this fear mongering that's happening on both sides. You have these, crazy, radicalized fundamentalists on both ends claiming that there's a war happening. And so for me, it was really trying to explore that intersection. What about the people that are caught in the middle, and how does this affect their actual lives?
Was there anything about the social conditions in this city that you wanted to explore that can lead to radicalization?
I think Toronto in and of itself is probably a better place for Muslims, or a better place for communities to thrive, because there is such a large sense of multiculturalism. Not to say that we're perfect, but I think that, for instance, other places like out west, you see there's there has been an issue in places like Calgary in the past. And I think partly due to the nature of the people in Calgary, maybe not as multicultural, not as diverse, there is a little bit more tension with different ethnic groups and societies there. So perhaps that may have been an issue out there. I don't know if Toronto is the the boiling pot for a problem like this, but it definitely does have its issues as well.
We heard you in that poem there condemning ISIS, and as well in this film. Why is that important to you right now as a message, as an artist?
I think a lot of times Muslim communities are so sick and tired of hearing about this problem and this issue. Some people have gone as far as just going into the state of denial. I actually look at it as the stages of grief, and what happens when people go through a grief. And actually one of the stages, I think the first stage is just shock and denial and disbelief. We're almost kind of like, how can something we love be used for such hate and horror? So some people are just completely in denial that this actually exists, that it's affecting anyone. And for me, it's about waking up my own community and really exploring some of the issues that internally help create this vibe, or help create this growing concern or fear that there are young people who are getting manipulated by this group.
What are the issues in your mind?
There's a lot of issues. It would be naive of me to just say that it's, A, B, and C. But I think, again, the growing issues of alienation, of isolation, the growing issues regarding Islamophobia. When we see these attacks taking place on Muslim women specifically, there's a huge, after the Paris attacks, there was a lot of Muslim women that were being attacked in public spaces. This feeds right into the propaganda of groups like ISIS, where they're teaching young Muslims that you're not wanted here, you're not a part of the society, you're not a part of the fabric of this country. And for me, it's very sad, because I'm Canadian, first and foremost. And I tell people that I was born here. And so I feel myself a part of the community here. The reality is some people may not view me as such. Some people might view me as an outsider. Still to this day, I get asked, where are you from? Right? You're born here, you live here your whole life. People are like, where are you from? But the reality is that there are unfortunately things that are happening in our community that we as Muslims need to be proactive about. We shouldn't wait for the headlines to confirm that this actually does exist. But at the same time, there is a growing issue regarding, for instance, the effects of Western foreign policy. What does it mean when you have things like the war on terror, and you go into a country like Iraq and you bomb it, and you take its resources and really leave it in a very shambled state? That has repercussions internationally. Now we're also trying to explore what that means for cultures like us living here in Canada.
I want to get into the process of this film in particular. What did you draw on when you were writing the screenplay?
I drew on the experiences of people that I've personally known or heard about. I had actually, while I was filming this project, I had a family member of mine who actually went over and joined ISIS. Okay, it was actually a girl in my family whose husband had gone over, and so she kind of got manipulated and was pretty much hustled into going as well. But at the same time, I've been working with several imams in the community and people who had been dealing with this on the ground, counseling young people who have these thoughts or ideas around this extreme form of violent, criminalized acts of violence in the name of Islam. And so speaking with a lot of the imams and trying to get personal accounts of stories, and also looking at, the tension some of these young people feel, and in the world they're living in. It's a very weird, secluded world. A lot of them are, they don't interact with the Muslim community. They're not really engaged in many of the Muslim community's affairs. They're mainly focused online. They live kind of in a bubble, in a hub, where they're just hearing and talking to people who are thinking the same thing they're thinking. Mm-hmm. So there are a multitude of issues that affect these young people, not to mention, like I said, the effects of Western foreign policy. People see what's happening in Iraq. They see what's happening in Afghanistan. They see what's happening in Palestine, and it makes them very angry, right? And they
go look for answers online, and
they go look for answers. They go look for ways that they feel they can help this problem. It's almost like a very perverted sense of social justice they feel like they're engaged in, right? They see an issue, they see a problem, and they want to solve it. But what we're trying to explain to them is actually you're not helping the problem. We agree there is a problem, but what you're doing, if you think you're doing it to please God, you're not doing that. If you think you're doing it to actually affect change, you're not doing that either. You're just ruining everything.
What was that like for you, seeing a family member go over there?
It was really sad. I mean, this is somebody who didn't necessarily present any signs I could say ahead of time. I could have read them and said like, oh, this person has very strange views. There was a person actually who was very involved in the community, used to help out in organizing events and stuff like that. And I think actually what happened was that she was in a lot of ways manipulated by, like I said, her husband that was there at the time. And these people are also going there with this utopian vision, right? They're going there to live in a land and or a country that they feel represents every value that they cherish. The reality is when they get there, a lot of them find out that it's just a big sham, that in fact they're actually going to see hell on earth. And so actually there is one point in the film where my character does end up going overseas, and the sense of remorse he has, the sense of regret he has is so immense, right? Because they go there and they literally throw away their lives. They go there and they know that once they're there, they can't come back. You've burned your passport, or if you do come back, most likely you'll be arrested anyways on arrival.
So that was an important message for you to get across with this film.
It was important to also explain to them that, this utopia that they're creating for you over there doesn't actually exist anyways. So if you think that you're going there and you're going to live in this, luxury palace and people are going to be serving you and you're going to have, hear the call to prayer outside and people are going to be, happy and go lucky on the streets, that doesn't exist. It's a war-torn country at the time.
And no place is perfect.
No place is perfect, but I mean, there are a lot of reasons why our families moved to Canada. There's a lot of reasons why we're here now, because we came from places like that to begin with, so why go back?
Last month, you hosted a screening of this film in Calgary. This past weekend, you were in Windsor. You're deliberately showing this film in public events in order to have these town hall style conversations.
Right.
Why is that important for you?
I think it's important for community members to also give me their thoughts and views around the issue. One of the things that deliberately I didn't do in the film was to present all the solutions, right? Because I don't have all the solutions. And part of this film's goal was actually to start the conversation in hopes of actually creating those solutions organically. So having community members there to talk about what we think could be tangible solutions to how to engage young people, how to stop people that could potentially already have these views or thoughts, and also how do we do, preventative work and help young people who may not have those thoughts or harboring those views as of yet, but potentially could have them in the future.
You're getting a range of responses. So first of all, what's the response been like from other Muslims, lay people?
I could say overwhelmingly the response has been fantastic. Overwhelmingly people have been very supportive. I have people who, at the end of the film screening are crying, in tears. In Calgary specifically, you had people whose actually family members had gone overseas. So then they're watching it was a very emotional process. And they really saw themselves in that picture. And I really try and show a lot of the internal workings of these family units. What happens to the families who are left behind? What happens to a mother whose son has gone overseas, never to be seen again? So the response from the Muslim community, I think, has been one that's very, very positive. Again, even showing films is a very new process. We don't really have too many Muslim film screenings anyways. So some people are a little bit tripped out by the idea, but when they get there, they watch it, they're happy, they're excited, and I couldn't ask for more.
And you invite also law enforcement and other officials,
right,
to see the films. Why is that important for you?
We actually have done in several cities a discussion that's taken place with, for instance, RCMP. In Calgary, they have a police department service out there that's really focusing on engaging with the Muslim community around the issue of radicalization. And I think it's important to have that conversation because there aren't really many opportunities for the Muslim community to engage with law enforcement in a non-confrontational fashion. A lot of times, we're getting this scary knock on our door at 3 a.m. and people are showing up in black suits and you don't really know what to expect. And that's been the overwhelming actual conversation piece ahead of time. People said, we're actually, a lot of the discussion pieces after the film have taken place have talked about the role of federal police and law enforcement in helping to perpetuate isolation in the Muslim community by stigmatizing certain young people, by harassing them, by really creating a very unfriendly environment. So we actually we show parts of that in the film. It's a dramatization, of course, but we definitely show the interaction some Muslims have with law enforcement and how that plays out into real life as well.
And you've been hearing from ISIS supporters, as well. What's that been like?
I mean, you know what? It comes with the territory. I knew that putting together this film, I would be getting hate from all directions. But as an artist, for me, it's important that my work actually means something and that it's actually getting to people. So if the people that I don't like are upset, then I think I'm doing my job. I think that was the goal anyways, was to really deter these people from joining groups like this. So I could only assume that they would be upset by it. So I haven't really been deterred by that.
That's scary, though.
It could be.
I mean, what gives you the confidence to continue to do this work?
If I don't do it, who will? I'm trying to use the same mantra that these guys use. The responsibility comes down to us. We have an individual responsibility to help make this world a better place. I feel like everybody has that responsibility and role. So I'm in a position where I can do that. I can create these conversations, create this awareness, create this campaign. And I feel like it would be selfish or naive of me to not act upon it. And so that's the responsibility I've been given, and I'm just trying to do my very small part.
What's the response been like from Muslim leaders?
It's been great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really been great. I think that, again, like I said, this is a very new experience for Muslim communities. Sitting down, going to a movie, watching it. A lot of times there's things in movies that, deter Muslims from watching, whether it be violence or profanity or nudity and these things. So Muslims kind of refrain from watching movies on a mass, like together. Some people might do it kind of secretly. Everyone has their Netflix account or whatever. But so this has been a very unique experience, having imams at the screening, actually sitting there with their kids, watching the movie, enjoying it. It's a trippy thing for me, but it's so fun. I really enjoy it.
You mentioned some imams are worried about counseling young people that are drawn to radical ideas.
Right.
How has this affected their approach? Have you seen what's come out of conversations with them around their approach to young people that are possibly being radicalized?
Muslim leaders are in such a catch-22 because it's so unfortunate that if they do try and help these young people and for whatever reason it doesn't work, then they get in trouble, right? Then RCMP, whoever comes knocking at the door saying, you were in touch with this person and he went overseas. What did you tell him, right? And if he doesn't step up, then it's like this person's going to be learning about Islam in a vacuum. They're not going to have anyone to discuss anything with, and so they end up going off anyways. So our leaders are really caught in between a rock and a hard place. They don't know what to do because, first of all, they're not trained in this field, right? They're not social workers or anything like that. They're classically trained theologians in that sense, right? They're studying religion. So now they're tasked with this idea or job of counseling people in a very crazy political environment, trying to counteract the negative portrayal they've been receiving in the media, while at the same time trying to show these young people that there is a reason to be here. There's a reason to live. Some of these young people, actually, you'd be surprised. I didn't mention this quite often, but I was with a very big community leader in Belgium. And Belgium has a growing issue, actually, as well, of the radicalized young men. And this Belgium leader told me that he's dealing with young people who are coming to him that are actually suicidal. They come to him and they say, we don't want to live anyways. We want to die. And so they say, in our community, we can't commit suicide. But if we go there and we die, then, we're martyrs and people will celebrate us and it won't look bad on our families. If we just go in our room and hang ourselves, it'll be a big shame, right? So you're dealing with people that have a multitude of crazy, complex issues going on in their minds. And these imams now are sitting in front of them being like, I learned from a holy book. How does that apply here, right? And our leaders are just being put, like I said, in this very tough position, and it's unfortunate they're not really getting the support that they need. And they're, in fact, getting more hate and stigmatization if their counseling, for instance, doesn't work the way others would like to see it work.
Brand new challenges, especially with brand new issues, like you
Right.
described, in terms of isolation, in terms of going online and finding communities
Right.
that that might pollute their minds. Okay, if you're just tuning in, this is Q, and I'm speaking with spoken word poet and storyteller Boonaa Mohammed about his new film, Tug of War. You touched a little bit on Paris and also the response to Paris.
Right.
So let's just deal with those in turn. There was these terrible attacks a few weeks ago. What was your first reaction when you heard that news?
I was actually in Casablanca in Morocco at the time. I was filming a documentary there, and we were watching it live on news, and it was actually taking place, but it was in French, so we couldn't really understand what was happening. I'm not that good in French. But we saw, attack, we saw Paris, and we were automatically just like, oh, please say it ain't Muslim, please say it ain't Muslim, please say it ain't Muslim. And then, the daunting realization comes about, then you realize actually it was Muslims that were involved, and your heart just sinks, you become very sad, very depressed. You start to think to yourself, great, what will the repercussions be? Instantly you already know that although non-Muslims were killed, Muslims are gonna, we're gonna have to deal with this burden when we get back home, And I instantly felt scared for my wife. I felt scared for my family that was in Canada, that something crazy could happen. And actually, as soon as we got back, you saw there was a mosque in Peterborough that was burned down.
Mm-hmm.
There were countless reports of Muslim women being attacked on the street, and you're upset, you're angry, and it's almost a sense of overwhelming frustration. You don't know what to do, right? Really, because you're only one person and you can only condemn something for so long. Part of me feels like I shouldn't have to condemn it. Part of me feels like you should know me. I'm not a jerk like that. I'm not going around killing people every day. Why do I have to represent or speak on behalf of these crazy people, right? I don't ask you to do the same for your ancestors or whatever. Mm-hmm. A part of you feels like I need to do more in terms of being proactive in this circumstance, of speaking out against this group and really directing my anger and frustration towards them. But again, Muslim youth specifically, I feel like, are very confused, right? Because they have to go outside every single day, especially young girls who wear hijab, and they become the spokesperson for a religion comprised of 1.7 billion odd people, right? And so every day they're going to school and they're answering questions from their classmates. What do you think about ISIS? And it's kind of like, great, like.
Especially as a young person, because even if you are a young person of faith, you're still growing in your understanding of.
You're still growing. You're still susceptible to influence and peer pressure and so many things that are really causing problems for these young people, in public setting. I almost feel sorrier for the kids that are growing up now. Actually, my first day of high school was 9/11. My first day of high school was 9/11. It was such a crazy time. People can't remember 2001 when it just happened. Before that, nobody even really cared about Muslims, right? It wasn't like we were on the big scope in the Western world. But as soon as 9/11 happened, I remember walking into class. My last name was Mohammed. I didn't know anything about my own faith. All of a sudden, I became the spokesperson for Islam. What do you think about September 11th? What do you think about New York? And I was like, I don't know. Like, oh, your religion says this. You didn't know that? And I was like, no, I didn't know that. And you just automatically on the defense, right? And that can do a lot to the psyche of a community, a generation growing up. You're consistently needing to defend yourself. That has repercussions. It has repercussions in terms of how you even view your identity, right? When you consistently need to defend yourself, you feel less and less welcome. You feel less and less a part of the fabric of society, and that cycle repeats itself. People who feel less on the part of the fabric of society, they become more isolated, they become more distant, and more susceptible to groups like ISIS. So it's a very sad cycle.
I wish we could continue this conversation. I have one last question for you. Why is Islamophobia something all Canadians should be concerned about?
Because we've seen actually that there is a history of discrimination in this country. And of course, we can talk plenty about our neighbors in the US. But in Canada, we have a history of, in times of hardship, we look to point the finger at someone, right? At one time in this country, it was the Aboriginal people. They were the enemy. Another time, it was the Asian folk that were the enemy. Another time, it was the Black and Caribbean folk that were the enemy. At one time, it was the Jewish community that was the enemy at one time. So, if we keep having this psyche of scapegoats, it's only inevitable that if it's not me today, it's going to be you tomorrow. It's a matter of us all speaking up for justice because it affects us all, irregardless of whether it's happening to us right now or not.
Thank you so much, Boonaa.
Thank you very much for having me.